Other participants go along with this idea is to bring human beings and society back into game theory and rationality, right? And so one could ask the question, well, if you are doing that, are you not leaving the logicians behind? And my hope is that logicians are also people, so some of them at least will come with me. So reasoning, this is starting at a very informal level and then seeing how we go towards various kinds of precision, right? So reasoning is the process of taking information or facts which one has and arrive at conclusions which follow. So where follow is left informal when we are talking about reasoning. And there is an excellent book by my late colleague Jonathan Adler and Lance Rips, which is titled Reasoning, and very well worth reading. So it's a kind of a supplementary reading for logicians to learn about informal reasoning. Now, so logic can be described as reasoning wearing a necktie. So it's a way of becoming somewhat formal about it. And the notion of what follows is made precise by specifying some formal language in which the information is expressed, and the notion of follows is made precise by means of some syntactic rules. So this is the kind of game we are all used to playing. Now, rationality is more related to practical goals and not just to reasoning. And yet it's typically the context in which reasoning takes place. I mean, those of us who are here go on reasoning without caring about why we are doing it, but of course people outside usually have a reason why they're reasoning. Okay, so an agent has certain goals and certain information, and the agent also has choices of actions. So which action is best? This decision is made in terms of the information which the agent has, and a process of reasoning, formal or informal, is used to derive further information. So the notion of practical reasoning, closely related to rationality, already goes back to Aristotle. Now, a formal version of rationality is utility maximization, about which Adam has already spoken a little bit. So this version assumes that an agent has a subjective probability over various outcomes associated with actions, and also a cardinal utility assigned to the outcomes. So this allows an expected utility to be allowed to assign to various actions, and then an action which maximizes expected utility is chosen by a rational agent. In other words, we define a rational agent as one who maximizes expected utility. Now, in the absence of cardinal utility, and this is something in which Sergei Artyomov has been interested and has written about it, so in the absence of cardinal utility, an agent may still have ordinal utility, where the agent has preferences among outcomes, but not a clear assignment of cardinal values to the outcomes, nor perhaps a subjective probability. So the agent knows, I prefer this to that, but not much more. So the agent may then play safe and choose an action whose outcome is guaranteed to have a certain minimum ordinal value. Or the agent may be ambitious and choose an action whose possible outcome is as good as possible. So a young man who is too shy to ask for a date follows the first Max-Min strategy. Because if he asks for a date, there are two possibilities. She says yes, or she ridicules him. And if he doesn't ask for a date, then it's the middle alternative. So if he's too shy, then he plays safe and doesn't ask for a date. Whereas a young man who is more forward may ask a strange young woman for a date without worrying about rejection. So they both have the same preferences. Rejection is worst, acceptance is best, and nothing is in between. And the shy young man goes by the safe choice, and the forward young man goes by the choice which has the best outcome.
You're also assuming they have the same value for the outcomes.
Yes, right. Okay, so now both reasoning and information adding up to knowledge or justified belief will enter at this stage. We'll call an agent rational if he or she does the best, however defined, given the agent's epistemic situation. So the agent has some process of reasoning and some way of assigning utilities and preferences, and then the agent chooses, which may be in terms of subjective utility or in some other ways. So various names are associated with early developments in this area. Von Neumann and Morgenstern, Savage, Hideka, Schelling, I would say Schelling is very much underread because he writes extremely well and is not quite as devoted to formal game theory as, say, someone like Aumann. There is, of course, Lewis, Aumann, many others. So after roughly 40 years of development, we now have something resembling a marriage between economics and logic, or if not a marriage, at least a friendship. Okay, so the ultimate goal of this enterprise is intelligent decision making at both the individual and social levels. So these are the introductory remarks, and now I want to talk a little bit about work done with some students here, two of whom are in fact students of Archimov. So the first one is work done with Charles Tastemir, who is sitting in the back and refused to speak. So suppose an agent is in a state of ignorance and has to choose between two actions, alpha and beta. Alpha has outcomes A1 up to AK, and beta has outcomes B1 up to Bn. So which action should the agent choose? Now, if the AI and B are cardinal utilities and VI and WI are the probabilities for these, then we can compare the expected values PI, VI with sigma QI, WI, and then we choose the action with the larger utility. But if the utilities are only ordinal and probabilities are not present, then we are really choosing between two ordered sets. Now, the context in which we came to think about this was the following. We were thinking about an agent who decides how to inform certain other agents or not, and then the outcome will affect the first agent also. As an example, supposing there is some fact P that I know, and I'm trying to decide between telling it to Dexter and telling it to Harvey, I can tell them together, in which case it will be common knowledge, or I can tell them separately, in which case they will both know, but neither will know that the other knows, and how they act may depend on my choice, right? Another example is, let's suppose that a wife is cheating on her husband, and she is wondering whether to tell him or not. Now, if she tells him, then he knows for certainty. If she doesn't tell him, then he has two possibilities. He thinks she doesn't cheat, and he thinks she does cheat, and he may act in a certain way. So an agent in a state of partial information will still make a choice, but that choice will depend on the agent's temperament, and sometimes if you know the agent's temperament, you can predict what they will choose. So we became interested in this issue, but we didn't know that other people had thought about this issue in a slightly different context. Namely, there is a well-known theorem, the Gilbert-Satterthwaite theorem, which says that no matter what electoral system you have, if there are three or more candidates, then it's always sometimes good to strategize, meaning vote for somebody who is not your best preference. Now this happened, for example, in 2000, where many people voted for Nader, who might well have preferred to vote for Gore, if they thought that Gore could win and Nader could not win. So maybe their best strategy was to vote for Gore, but they voted for Nader. So this kind of thing, not voting for your first choice, may sometimes be useful. Now the Gilbert-Satterthwaite theorem, the question is, does it extend to a case where you're choosing between slates? And supposing one slate has candidates A and B, and the other one has C and D, you prefer A to C, but you prefer D to B, then how will you choose between the slates? So extending an ordering between individual candidates to an ordering between slates is a very natural problem. Now, this problem was looked at by Kanai and Peleg, and they found some negative results. They showed some very natural conditions that you would want to impose on the ordering on sets, which comes out of orderings on points, and they showed that these are inconsistent. We used a slightly different method, which is the method of a choice function, which uses the typical elements from the AI and the BI and compares the typical elements that's chosen, and we showed that the method we are using satisfies some slightly weaker conditions of the conditions that Kanai and Peleg wanted. So we define the notion of a rational or suitable choice function and give a complete characterization of such functions. We offer a formal model of knowledge in games and investigate how an agent who influences the knowledge of agents can influence their behavior. Okay, part of this work has been published in a volume dedicated to Dexter Kozin, who became 60, I think slightly before Sergey, right? He was December 25 and you were?
December 20.
So 5 days older. Okay. So part of this paper was dedicated to Dexter, but the full paper will appear in a game theory journal.
These are young guys.
Pardon me?
These are young people.
Yes. Okay. Now the next part is about the work of Farishta Satari, and she's from Afghanistan, but she grew up in India, in Delhi. So she was born in Kabul, moved to Delhi, grew up in Delhi, and then eventually moved to Canada. Now she's here a student at CUNY. So she considers herself part Indian, part Afghan, and perhaps part American as well. Not sure about the last part. Okay, so one way to create knowledge in others and influence their behavior is to communicate with them. And a usual device is to utter sentences. But a sentence may go beyond its literal meaning. Now, there are many people who have already looked at DEL, dynamic epistemic logic, where somebody utters a true sentence and then that changes the epistemic situation, or perhaps somebody whispers a true sentence to somebody and so on. So this is an area much looked at, and one of the people working in it is right here. Okay, now sometimes a sentence may go beyond its literal meaning, and this was a phenomenon investigated by Paul Grice, who's a professor at Berkeley, died a few years ago, and he was interested in the issue of implicature, the way in which a sentence said goes beyond its literal meaning. So here's a young man says to his date when they're in front of his apartment building, and he says, "Would you like to come upstairs and see my etchings?" Now, very likely he means more than he says. But why does he not just say it outright? Would you like to come upstairs and have sex? Now, this was an issue addressed, of all people, by Steven Pinker. And there's a very nice YouTube video by Pinker in which he says that the difference between the two utterances is that the first way of saying it creates knowledge in both parties, but the woman is not sure what the young man intends. He may indeed have etchings to show her. So if she says no, he has still saved face, and she's not sure what he intended in the first place. So there is knowledge, but not common knowledge. So there is no common knowledge of the young man's intention to have sex with her.
It's amazing what logic applies to.
Right. Now, in a cartoon by James Thurber, the young woman says yes, and the young man replies, "Wait right here, I will go upstairs and bring them." Okay, so Farishta is interested also in this particular situation, which is when A is speaking to B, then C may be listening, and they may both know that C is listening. Perhaps A only knows that C is listening, or perhaps it is common knowledge that C is listening. And in this example, one person is saying to another person, "My boss is weird," and the boss is standing behind saying ahem. So the boss has heard, and now the question is what will be the outcome, etc. Now, this takes us to the third part of my description of work of students. This is work with Walter Dean, who got his doctorate 2 or 3 years ago, and he's now teaching at Warwick University in England. So when candidates make statements during a campaign, they intend to influence the voters, hopefully in their own favor. So doing this requires the theory of what the voters believe, what their preferences are, and how far these preferences correlate with the candidate's own preferences. So naturally, candidates don't say everything that they think, and some candidates even say things that they don't think. So Hillary Clinton's statement in 2008 that she once shot a duck, I believe she was campaigning in Indiana, and this may have been an attempt to woo gun rights voters. But she may also have at the back of her mind voters in Boston who might not like this statement so much, and then she has to weigh the two influences, effect on the Indiana voters and effect on the Boston voters, right? And then she makes this statement because she assumes that the positive value outweighs the negative value. Obama's recent support of gay marriage probably carried the subtext, "Don't worry, I'm still a liberal even if I play golf with Boehner." It's more than playing golf, but we all know what he means. So Walter Dean and I offered a formal model of the mental states of the voters, how a statement by a candidate influences these mental states, and what is the best thing for a candidate to say. And this work has been published in the Proceedings of the Indian Conference in Logic and Applications, ICLA 2011. So if you'll allow me to brag, we at CUNY are doing exciting stuff with logic, knowledge, and rationality, how it affects society and how it affects us as human beings.
Is that include sex?
Pardon me?
Does that include sex?
Yes. It is. Okay, so happy birthday, Sergei. These are the two colors that I believe come from the Russian flag.
Yes. Well, it was out of the background, of course. So.
Yes, of course.
We have a concept.
Right. Okay, I think we will have questions afterwards, and the next person is Adam, who has some slides to show, right? So, yes, that's right. Badigali comes first. Right. Sorry. Okay. So, happy birthday again, and I will.
Okay, so I prepare these slides with ideas about what we should do and what we should not do in the epistemic game theory program that was described by Adam in the morning. So I'm calling them maxims, trying to convey the idea, and I don't want to take myself too seriously, but in some sense they are principles that I have been using at first in a tacit and not completely aware way, and then I became more aware and articulate about them. So the topics we are going to talk about, I chose a rule of three topics, and for every topic three kind of things I want to say about them. First is expressibility. I think you will see kind of resonates with these things that are said in this conference. Then rationality and choice, and knowledge and belief. So expressibility. This is what I have. I guess this is the motto I have in my Skype address. Explicit is better than implicit. It is the first line of the Zen of Python, I think. Sorry?
An Italian is saying this?
Well, So this is basically the principle that we should state all the assumptions about the game, about players' behavior, and about beliefs using primitive terms. If you use an approach with propositional logic, propositional modal logic, there would be atomic sentences like elementary actions that can be taken in a game and the like, and terms derived from other terms, formulas. So you may think this is totally obvious. Well, if it is, if I state it as a principle, it means that in the game theory approach it's not obvious. So in the epistemic game theory approach described by Adam in the morning, we are not using usually modal logic. We have a totally semantic approach. So there are two papers. The two papers I'm mentioning at the end of the slides are just survey. One of them has been written by Adam Brandenburger. So basically, the idea is that we should have, we have the basic facts like, player I takes action left, okay? We have, expressions that are things that relate to basic facts, or things like, player 1 believes with probability at least 1/2 that this fact is true. And, for every expression, you get something else like player I believes this expression is true with probability at least P is another expression. And descriptions basically describe the mental state of a player. So the point is that assumptions, if we start with this approach, basically the idea is that we can construct what we call, canonical type structures, which are kind of, related, they are kind of analogs of the canonical model in logic, in modal logic in particular. And so the point of this, methodology I'm proposing is that assumptions like players are rational, or every player believes that everybody is rational, they should correspond to events in this canonical type structure. So not just any type structure, a canonical one. Why? Because an event in a canonical type structure is something that exactly corresponds to either expressions or things that can be taken as limits of expressions without any added baggage. So without any implicit assumptions about how the player thinks. So examples of things that can be done according to this principle. The characterization of a solution concept in games called rationalizability, as in this canonical model, which has strategies and beliefs. You have a big space of states of the world. You take the projection over the strategy dimension of the event rationality and common belief in rationality. This is an event in the canonical type structure, and it gives you the strategies consistent with the solution concept. This is something which is fine, okay? Something which is not fine are other solution concepts which are similar to rationalizability. I cannot describe it, but I just make you aware there is a solution concept for Bayesian games called interim-independent rationalizability. This solution concept has terms that are not defined starting from other terms. They are basically a circular, definition. They are self-referential, and this solution concept doesn't meet this kind of characterization. So to me, this is out, so to speak, unless you restrict your attention to a particular set of situations where you can characterize it. And then I think about what is the status of the common prior assumption or epistemic condition for Nash equilibrium given by Aumann and Brandenburger that use the common prior assumption. Here I'm not completely clear because it's not completely obvious to me that the common prior can be described in that way. I think that what Adam does actually makes sense, so it can be done, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay. The second maxim is strategies cannot be chosen. Yes. So rationality is for actions, rational planning is for strategy. So if you think about the tree that Adam drew, strategies are things like left and right, and so actions are things like left and right, and strategies are I play left if the other guy played right, and this kind. So the idea is that you should use formulas where you find maximization over actions. Why? Because only actions can be irreversibly chosen. So rationality is about actions, but what the strategies are about? Strategies are about rational planning. So I have to go fast, but if you take this route, distinguish rationality, which is about actual choices and beliefs, from rational planning, which is an entirely epistemic idea, then you get also the ability to express the difference between intentional and unintentional action in a formal way. So there are things that are okay according to this principle and things that are not. So there are papers and books that try to do dynamic epistemic game theory without using Bayes' rule, because they rely on a notion of choosing strategies. So that's not right according to my principle. And this is the last maxim. Belief is not knowledge. Beliefs and rationality cannot be known, but they can be believed. Okay. So what I'm using here is the standard definition of belief as a subjective epistemic state of certainty, which is fallible. So in epistemic logic is the KD for 5 thing, whereas knowledge is supposed to be justified through belief, and the way I interpret it is something that comes from introspection, observations, and logical deduction, something that we can represent in S5 in logic or partition or correspondences. So the point is we can only have beliefs about what other people believe. We cannot know it, okay? And we can only have beliefs about things that other people have not yet done. We cannot know it. So, common belief in rationality, yes. Knowledge of own preferences, introspective, yes. Common knowledge of rationality, no, okay? Not good. Common knowledge of preferences, well, that the status there is unclear, but it may be right. And these are the references. Done.
I have 2 slides, and my goal is to cause as much trouble as I possibly can in 2 slides. I'm sorry they're not preloaded. That didn't quite happen. Take it from there. Okay. So I was asked to participate in a panel titled Rationality and Knowledge, or vice versa, or some such. And so I guessed that it would be taken as given that the correct unit of analysis would be the individual, which I think is what is meant by the agent. So I thought I would take issue with that. So here is, to my mind, a just wonderful quote from a wonderful book by a leading scientist, primatologist, excuse my uncertainty about the pronunciation, Franz de Waal, who gave a talk at the NYU Stern of Business last year. He wasn't quite sure what he was doing at a business school, but he gave a wonderful talk and very relevant, and I think you can see why from this quote. So I highly recommend the book. The title perhaps got a little manipulation by the publisher. This is a trade book. I kind of like kind and nature and all of that, but don't be misled into thinking this book isn't a compilation of his decades of studies of primates and what he has to say. I think the central thesis is that both social and selfish aspects are fundamental. And the key point is fundamental. So social, which you might read as cooperative, although he indicates there may be some important things to understand there, is not to be understood as derived behavior in the sense of reciprocity, as the biologists call it, or repeated games, as the game theorists would have it, at least as some game theorists would have it, but as equally primitive. And the two are present and coexist, and that's very interesting and scientifically grounded in a way that he says Homo economicus is not. I love this quote. So that's the first slide. What's the unit of analysis? And I haven't quite said why I think this speaks to the unit of analysis, but here comes the second slide in a moment, and this one is a reference, in effect, to the history of game theory, which I would like to spend about an hour on. The correct history of game theory. The received wisdom is incorrect. The correct history of game theory begins, if it begins anywhere, in 1928 with von Neumann's paper, to which I alluded earlier, famously known for the formulation and proof of the minimax theorem, but as I also indicated, much more, the concept of game tree, the concept of induced matrix, the zero-sum theory, and indeed the minimax theorem, and then a full part of the paper devoted to the development of so-called cooperative game theory. There are two branches of game theory, the so-called non-cooperative, those are the matrices and trees, and the so-called cooperative, formerly the characteristic function. The terms are misnomers. both cooperation in some sense and competition can be studied in both branches. But the key is in the so-called cooperative branch that the primitive is a concept of joint behavior, not individual behavior, social action, if you like. And this is viewed as primitive. It does not require derivation. And that's the beginning of a long story. But that is as good a place to look for insight into behavior, as Rohit was alluding to, as the so-called non-cooperative branch, the better-known branch involving the game matrices and game trees. Very important, fundamental within game theory, equally fundamental, in my opinion, though it has fallen a little bit away from the mainstream, more in this country, in fact, than in Europe and elsewhere, where it's studied more than here, is the so-called cooperative game theory. So my second slide talks to that. I rather liked this quote from a rather good book, which gets much closer to the true history of game theory, with a wonderful title, The World is a Mathematical Game. And so, why not talk about John Nash, and then I'll sit down. So, implicit in a lot of what's been said on game theory has been that there's much game theory that has nothing to do with Nash equilibrium. In fact, once one recognizes the uncertainty that is intuitively, and many of us think empirically, very central to games, Nash equilibrium occupies a very special place, and Professor Adamov has shown just how special, in a sense, that place is. Nash's other big idea was that non-cooperative theory, the matrix and the tree, is fundamental, that cooperative behavior must be derived from the non-cooperative. This is called the Nash programming game theory. I believe it is scientifically invalid for the reasons I've just shown you. And so I think I've begun by ostensibly talking about rationality and knowledge, but not really. I thought I would talk about what is the unit of analysis and leave you with the notion that game theory studies both the individual and the joint as equally primitive via the two branches of game theory. And that presumably has something to do with how we apply game theory, at least within social systems, to use a somewhat pompous term. And finally, read the book by Franz de Waal, for anyone here who is interested in rationality and knowledge. I think one has as much to learn from that as from many things. So, 2 slides. I hope a lot of trouble and provocation, and now I'll sit down.
I have to agree with Adam Brandenburger on the proper unit of analysis, and so I'm in the wrong units because I'm concerned with I'm sorry, yes, I'm concerned with agents in this case. The idea is if you believe that justification logic captures some formal aspects of justification, at least in the case of justified true belief, you might ask how it might do in the case of justified false belief. And so the idea here was to break a few axioms. In fact, it breaks a lot in justification logic. And so we start with an extreme the case. It's the logic of an agent whose justified beliefs are false, who can't avow his own propositional attitudes or believe tautologies, but who could believe contradictions. That sounds like it's almost useless, but it's the starting point for an investigation of philosophical skepticism. Perhaps characterizes, or at least has something to do with the agents of Brian Leiter's political dystopia. He wrote about them in a paper called The Circumstances of Civility, in which the epistemic values of understanding and knowledge are subordinated to the non-epistemic ends. And I was also interested in the contemporary debate on anthropogenic global warming. So just to say very quickly, because this has been gone over before in this conference, justification logic adds new propositional types to propositional first-order logic. They're of the form term T is justification for P. Artemov, the simplest semantics Artemov gave recently is natural semantics. Justifications are sets of formulas. T colon P holds if and only if P is in the interpretation, just a set of formulas. It's pure syntax. Somebody told me. That's my reason for believing something. Artemov told me. So that's why, I read it in the Bible. That would do it. Justification logic studies have emphasized provability, justified true belief, omniscience, notions defined for justification logics tend to reflect this emphasis, like factivity, that's the explicit analog of T. Axiomatically appropriate constant specifications. It's a necessitation rule in some logics. If you have an axiom, then you can justify with a constant. You can't do that consistently in the logic introspection as well. You can check that you have the justifications you have. These agents can't do that, not without extending the logic. So denial logic starts out like justification logic, but it adds the denial axiom, and also for technical reasons, I like to add a pairing axiom. If you're attempting to reason with justified false beliefs, then you need to carry them along somehow. And that's one of the defects, I suppose. It lacks the parsimony of the logic of proofs. You need additional principles in order to do reasoning. Like, for example, I don't know, if S, think of S as, I don't know, Corinthians colon 17, Jesus was resurrected. That's my statement. That's my P. And T is John 3:16. If you believe, you'll be, you'll live forever too. Well, this allows you to combine them, this operation. So think of wearing out your opponent by accreting justifications and formulas. So the first thing you can say is it can't justify its own denial axiom. Notions of constant specifications have to be revised for this, and but it's sound and complete, and the natural semantics extends to denial logic and yields many models. So the idea was to support some philosophical interpretations. It goes beyond the skeptical challenges posed by Descartes' evil genius. Descartes thought that even when he was dreaming, 2 + 3 still is 5. And it also is a little strong for Putnam's brains and vats, but you're not required to use it at its full strength. So I'll just mention how it works with Putnam's brains and vats. I'll try to make this quick and then end. The idea is that we've always been brains in a vat, there is a large supercomputing facility. I don't think anyone's estimated what you would need, but at least billions of petaflops. This has been a weak point. Hooked up to invatted brains in these roiling cauldrons of nutrients, and it's providing impulses to the brains, and they have this perceived world. The computing facility is programmed to realize what I would call this negative constant specification. I could say briefly what that is. Constant specifications in justification logic have the property they're closed under. If T is justification for P, then P is in the set, and that's in the set, and P is in the set. That's the closure principle. Negative justification, constant justification sets, constant specifications, excuse me, have the property that if E is justification for P, then not P is in the set. If the first is in the set and not P is, if the negation of the first is in the set, then P is in the set. It has to alternate. So the idea is that the computer provides a sense experience, which you represent in denial logic as justification terms. So S:E holds for the brain. I believe I'm standing here, but in fact I'm not. I'm really a brain in a vat. That's the only way I could give this talk, by the way. I'd be too nervous otherwise. But I'm not in a position to know this. Okay, so now there's there's something you can say, which is a bit like what Putnam had in mind. He intended to refute the skeptical challenge to show that we couldn't be brains in vat with and for that he devised a causal theory of reference. But I don't have that. What I have is something else. I was thinking of the red pill and the blue pill in the Matrix, but now I realize that this has other connotations. But imagine in the setup that in this setup, you extract what the brain is perceiving, the perceived world. It's comprehensively false about wrong about the external world. Well, you can extract this. This is the knowledge extraction operator that Artemov and Cousins used. You can say in this logic what it means to be coherent. You can give a coherence theory or a notion of coherence. I won't say what it is, but the idea is that there is a model of the perceived world you can extract from this using compactness of justification logic, a model of the perceived world of the brain. And this is the last slide. Just to handle agents who can believe tautologies, you can fuse denial logic with either justification logic or the logic of proofs, stronger logics, and that will handle invatted brains that aren't quite as diluted, at least. So that's, I guess that's it. I'll cut myself short now. Yes. Next speaker.
This is not part of the talk, I'm sorry.
Turned off and on?
It's a puzzle.
Where is the data of this computer?
And I can solve this.
Yeah.
Can you log in? Can you use your
I don't know.
Can you use your account?
No, it's on this computer. Turn it off. This will take a long time. Well, Control Alt and Delete takes us here, and we need the password. I don't have an
I can
account
use
on
the
computer.
Blackboard if...
I don't have an account. Who has an account? Not on this computer. No, it's on the computer. So I guess I'll have to turn it off.
You have your slides on the memory stick?
It's on...
Oh, it is on a memory stick, so I guess we
You have
can.
your slides elsewhere? Because I have another computer.
I have the slide without cost, my memory stick.
No, I can actually use the Blackboard if...
No, I have your slide, just the conversion without the cost.
It's on internet, but I can download
No,
it.
it's right here.
No, that's a different slide.
I mean,
That's a different
the
slide.
ones you emailed me and not the ones you want.
No.
Well, what about the next speaker? You can go last while we fix this.
Okay.
How does this thing shut down?
No, it's in the Dropbox. I dropped it on this computer. No, just now. Before the talk. I can actually use the Blackboard. It's
No. Let the next speaker speak.
Okay.
And meanwhile, we'll fix this. It's in a directory called Circle.
Okay, it's a PDF, correct?
I mean, use this instead? Yeah, sure. Yes.
It's a PDF?
Yes.
Is this going to the right place, this one?
Yeah.
This goes to the right place? Okay. Can you plug this someplace, please? Oopsies, sorry. Yeah, sorry. There we go. Okay. What's the name of your talk?
This one, fixed slides. Fixed two.
No. The other one?
Yeah, one above that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Would you like to? This one?
Yes.
Okay. The remote's not going to work. You can just go up and down. Okay.
Thank you very much. So this is going to be just a very brief report on a paper I had the privilege of writing with Professor Adamov. And this came about by thinking about what's called the knowability paradox. So in the philosophy world, people who have constructive sympathies are usually called verificationists. Sometimes they're called anti-realists. And to be a verificationist is to believe that all truths are knowable. And this idea is usually formalized by the principle we have up there, which we call verificationist knowability. This is the principle that F implies diamond KF. And the problem with this principle is that it implies what's called the omniscience principle. It implies that all truths are known, that F implies KF. Okay, and this is a paradox because, so-called paradox, because on the one hand there's nothing obviously wrong with the proof, but very many people think that something must have gone wrong. And the usual suspect as to what's gone wrong is that the proof involves the more sentence, the sentence that P is true but not known. And as we've seen already, this sentence is not knowable. So you might expect that you try to combine this with something about knowability and you get strange results. But what we discovered was that that's actually not the case. The more sentence has nothing to do with it. So what we did is we used a bimodal framework with the modalities box and diamond and the epistemic modality K, and we found a semantic proof of the paradox, namely that verificationist knowability implies omniscience. And so the key idea is that a model M is a model for verificationist knowability if and only if that model is omniscient. And a model is omniscient when each of its states is a singleton with respect to the epistemic accessibility relation. So it has no distinct epistemic alternatives. So the problem, it turns out, is not the more sentence, it's not any detail of the Church-Fitch proof. The problem is with the formalization of the verificationist knowability principle. And so we thought, given that verificationist knowability suffers from this problem, what other kinds of principles might we devise or come up with that don't suffer from this problem? Now, verificationist knowability is supposed to express a constructive idea of truth, and it's also supposed to apply to all truths. And we found that in this bimodal framework, we could tease these two aspects apart. So we could formulate principles that have a more constructive character and principles that have a more universal character. So a little bit of setup. So we call a proposition F, we call it stable in a given model if it satisfies F implies box F. And the intuitive idea is that a proposition is stable when, once it becomes true, it stays true at any subsequent stage of investigation or at any subsequent time. And if we restrict verificationist knowability to just stable truths, we get what we call the principle of stable knowability, that box F implies diamond KF, so all stable truths are knowable. And we showed that you can't derive the omniscience principle from this. Now, why would we want to restrict verificationist knowability to just its stable instances? Well, this is by analogy to the Girl translation of intuitionistic logic into S4, where prefixing a box to a proposition forces a constructive reading of it. Putting a box in front of the F there marks the fact that the proposition which is supposed to be knowable is constructive in character.